I'm curious, has sleep disordered breathing become more popular over the last few decades, or is it something that's we've always just dealt with and maybe it's just now becoming more popular?
By popular, I think you mean more well known, because
Right, correct.
obviously, yeah, the prevalence of it is very, very confusing. Everybody believes that there's a whole bunch of nutritional factors, environmental factors, and I'm not disputing that. I think there's probably something going on that's made us much more susceptible to this problem. But sleep medicine as a formal field where you have sleep centers only came into existence 45 years ago. So yes, there is an absolute impact on the prevalence just because now we know we've got doctors who can diagnose this. Nonetheless, something has changed and people probably have this condition more. We know, for example, if you have obesity, you have a tremendous risk for having sleep disordered breathing because the obesity causes the fat tissues around your tongue to expand, and then you end up having sleep apnea. But there's all kinds of people that are not overweight that
Right.
also have sleep apnea.
Right. So we've talked about the condition. Now let's talk a little bit about what people can actually do. You talk about kind of different levels of treatment in your book a little bit. You talk about nasal spray, nasal strips, PAP machines. So I guess to even back up one more time is the sleep breathing condition that most people have is that they need to be breathing more nasally. Is that correct?
Well, for sure, because we need to be breathing more nasally just in general. And
Right.
that's the way
Yes.
we, right. And so what happens is with sleep disordered breathing, there is an inflammation that goes on in the tissues, starting from the nose all the way down to the bottom of the throat, so that it's extraordinarily common that most people with sleep disordered breathing have nasal problems just
Mhm.
from the get-go. Like either that actually helped them, not help them, hurt them and led them down that path, or the sleep disordered breathing worsened it. So in my career, when I meet somebody with sleep disordered breathing, the first thing I ask is, tell me about your nasal breathing. Like, do you have congestion when you go to bed at night? Do you have congestion when you wake up in the morning? And the answer is in the affirmative for a large number of people. And they go, well, what do you do about that? And so they're thinking, well, that's just me. That's just who I am. I said, no, that's not a zero tolerance policy. You have to recognize that if your nasal breathing is messed up because of runny nose, stuffy nose, congested nose, then you have to do something about that. Otherwise, it's going to be very self defeating to try to use some other treatment that's more advanced. If you try to use a PAP machine and you have chronic congestion, you can actually give yourself a chronic sinus problem.
Mhm.
So why would you do that? You wouldn't. You would say, no, let me start with my nose. That's what we focused on the last several years, getting people to work on their nose to get nasal breathing in really good shape. And a lot of people have trouble with that because they normalize their breathing. They just, this is the way I am. Why would I think something should be different?
Right. So do you help to train people with their nasal breathing by when they're awake first and get them trained to be more naturally nasal breathing when they're awake, therefore when they're sleeping they're more naturally able to do that? And if so, do you use things like taping their mouth, nasal strips, or what all do you use?
Certainly, I mean, certainly step by step. And the very first thing, as I say, go into the shower, get a great shower, get some steam in the shower, clean out the boogies, all the snot, get it out, step out of the shower and take a deep breath through your nose and remember that breath because that's the breath you need 24 hours a day, sleeping and waking. And
Mm.
people do that and they go, gosh, I don't think I have that. So I said, all right, well, most people don't. And so that means you've got to evaluate. Is it, by the way, on my website, barrycrakowmd.com, there's a free video series. It's a 1 hour series on nasal breathing. It's called the Nose, 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 KNOWS. In that, I walk people through what's called allergic and non allergic rhinitis, which are the two most common reasons why people have trouble breathing through their nose. But just to give you a quick sample of it, we learned years ago that some of these individuals who come in and they're getting diagnosed and they're like, oh, well, I can't use CPAP. I mean, you know, that kind of thing. You say, all right, we want you to take a bottle of nasal saline. I want you to squirt it in your nose several times a day. It can be 3 times a day, it can be 10 times a day. Just keep cleaning out your nose for a couple of weeks. And they'd come back to us in 2 weeks and say, this is crazy, but I'm sleeping better. How can that be? They say, well, that's how important your nose is. And of course, that's a great sales job because if you did that and now you're sleeping better, you're going to say, gee, so maybe I really do have one of these sleep breathing conditions. Some of the people say, well, is that all I need, nasal saline? And some people will go that direction, like, oh, I'm not doing anything else. But then you keep adding in, you add nasal strips or nasal dilators, or you talk about, position, in the bed, or you talk about cooler temperature in the bedroom because that can help with breathing. Nonetheless, over time, many people do need either a professional oral appliance, it's called, for the dental device, or they need PAP therapy. We found tremendous success in 2005 by stopping prescribing CPAP because CPAP is continuous pressure. It's very uncomfortable. And we switched over to bi-level devices, which means a higher pressure when you breathe in, a lower pressure when you breathe out, much more natural, organic to the way you breathe. And most people adapted to it much faster, much better, absolutely loved it compared to CPAP. So we stuck with that ever since 2005 and had tremendous success with these patients, particularly, as you know, from my book and my career. Most of my patient cohorts have had mental health disorders, which means they have a terrible time trying to adapt to PAP therapy. So we had to create all these paradigms for them to help them get to that place so they could adapt. And one of the key adaptive points was switching from CPAP to bi-level modes. And we started that in 2005 and did that for 15 straight years with great success.
Wow. A lot of people, if they have a sleep condition or they're struggle to fall asleep or struggling to stay asleep, oftentimes they might go to some sort of sleeping pill. They might go to melatonin. They might start taking magnesium, is really popular now. And I know one of the things that you talk about is it's not just about the quantity of sleep that you get, but it's the quality of sleep that you get. And sometimes those are probably going to be relatively proportional, but sometimes not. And it sounds like to me that a lot of these things that people are using are probably maybe hopefully improving the quantity of their sleep. And so they think that they're getting the benefit they need to get, but they might still be having these sleep fragmentations throughout the night. So their quality of sleep is still disturbed and they're not hitting the delta sleep and the REM sleep that they should be. Therefore, they're still experiencing brain damage. Is that kind of what you're seeing when people are going to do these other remedies? They're just getting potentially maybe quantity of sleep but not quality?
So you hit the nail on the head. If you went to the average person on the street and said, tell me about the quality of your sleep, you just said that was your question, like 80% of them will go, I sleep 7 hours a night.
Yeah.
I go, wait a second. I didn't ask you about numbers. I said, so people don't know how to think about quality. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that, as you said, if they keep sleeping longer, they're going to go, well, it must be better. The truth of the matter is, some of these supplements, even some sleeping pills, may improve sleep quality for some people, but it's absolutely trial and error. It's not something like, oh, the scientific evidence shows this or that.